All right, do we have a quorum?
We do.
Okay, cool. Everybody stand for the invocation of the pledge. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, Lord God. Thank you for everything you do for us. Lord, bless our city staff, bless our first responders, and bless our citizens, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Chair Lomnick.
Here.
Vice Chair Forges.
Here.
Member Keller.
Here.
Member Chacon is absent. Member Galvin is absent. Member Butler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Perfect, thank you very much. Okay, consent agenda. Can I get an approval for the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held January 14th?
So moved.
I have a first, can I get a second?
A second.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Member Keller and a second by Member Butler. Let's go ahead and vote. All right, that passes. Okay, no old business, no new business. Miscellaneous, we're gonna do a workshop. This is for Envision 2045, Ocoee Comprehensive Plan and Land Development Code Update with Zoning Manager Whitfield.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, board members, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. So hopefully today's going to be a fun evening. We won't be here till midnight. I want to first thank the PCC for your service over the years, and this is a great opportunity to hear about the direction that we're going in. For the comp plan update, I want to start by introducing the comprehensive planning team. So for development services, we have myself, and if pretty much everybody in the audience is a member of the comp plan team. We've got Tori, our urban designer, architect. So some of these folks you may not know. Ginger, our director. Steve, public works director in the back. Lewis, our map expert. Bernice, you've heard her present on a variance. Brett is sitting next to her, our concurrency and commitments coordinator, and we got Jen and Jesse in the back, and I don't see Seth. Seth is here. He's our floodplains administrator. So this effort for the comp plan update it's all of the departments that you see here represented and giving their expertise as they gather the data and analyze the data and all that. So just as a brief background and reminder, we presented this body with all the data and the results of that data back in February of last year. We presented the goals and objectives back in August of last year. Over the past year and change, or almost full year, as we are writing the policies, we did make some minor adjustments in the objectives. We added a couple of objectives just so that it's cleaner and easier to follow. So we're going to present in chapter by chapter format. So the first chapter is introductions. That's just going to be a brief clip of the vision. Then chapter 2 will include 3 elements: the future land use, housing, and recreation open space. So after we get through with that chapter, then we'll have Q&A for that chapter, and then we'll proceed chapter by chapter. The vision statement. You guys have seen this before. The vision is still to create a sustainable community that's attractive, economically sound, where our businesses and our neighborhoods thrive, looking at diverse and compact yet complementary uses, quality development, safe, connected systems for the movement of people and goods, but at the same time preserving our environment and our natural resources and creating parks and open spaces, including civic open spaces, to create places where our residents and visitors can gather and socialize. And all of that, in a nutshell, is we want to create a healthy community. So going first into chapter 2, which is consisting of the future land use element. You've seen this goal before. That hasn't changed. Again, seeking a sustainable and healthy and balanced community and preserving our natural environment. In total, just as a quick thing, we'll be covering about 55 objectives with you. So you'll see that some of the staff, we're going to be zipping through these quickly just to make sure that we have time to answer questions. The first objective in the future land use element is to recognize that we have a future land use map. Statutes requires that we adopt a future land use map. And that map will establish the density, how density and intensity is defined. We establish a process and a formula for determining the maximum dense development potential. We also add a statement in there that wasn't in the previous comp plan that says, these future land use categories give you certain densities and intensities, but they're not entitlements. You still have to prove that they can be developed and that the development meets the land development code. The second objective deals with establishing the different kinds of future land use categories. So with this comp plan update, we're introducing 2 new categories. The first one is a mixed use future land use category. It targets having complementary yet different uses, and a new low medium density residential land use category. You'll see also, you were all sent, I apologize, we couldn't give you more than 2 days to look at the policy document, but you'll see that we've made some adjustments in the density ranges to try to better capture the ability to serve our 74,000 residents in the future. For the mixed-use category, we added a provision that could consider a density bonus in very specific circumstances, and that's spelled out in the policies and sub-policies under this objective. And we also, in the current, in the current data and inventory analysis section of the comp plan, it allows for some projects to have a mix of residential and non-residential in our commercial and our industrial future land use descriptions. We're just moving that ability into policy and spelling out exactly how density can be achieved. I'm going to come back to this slide in just a second. I want to go to this slide. As part of this comp plan update, we are, as you can see here, there's in this future land use map, there's this new low medium density category and this new mixed use category. We want to apply this mixed use category in this geographic area that is, we're trying to present as Ocoee's downtown. And the reason why we want to acknowledge this site is that this geographic area already has a mixture of uses in terms of everything from single-family detached to industrial, civic, institutional, parks, a little bit of ag in the north side of that, and industrial. So it's like a conglomerate of mixes of uses already. So going back to this slide, the introduction of a mixed-use category that allows 20 units an acre with a density bonus of up to an additional 10 units per acre, so looking at a possibility of 30 units per acre seems quite daunting. But as we're doing this comp plan update, we're also doing the LDC update, which will have very clear, specific criteria that will require a development to go through context-sensitive design in terms of the massing of the buildings, the scale, the setbacks, how it looks and functions, and in relation to what's around it. So changing the future land use designation in this area isn't necessarily saying that we're going to have a 3-story commercial building next to a single-family home. The LDC will guide how that office might look. So it may be an office use, but the building might look more like the architecture of a single-family home. So that's where the marriage between the comp plan and the LDC come together. The comp plan says you can have so many units and so much square footage. The LDC says, yes, you can, but it needs to look like this, so that you're not disturbing the appearance of the character of the area. So that's how they work with each other. So with this comp plan update, we're hoping to do a city-initiated future land use map amendment to designate this area that you see in brown as a mixed-use category. And as projects and sites come in, they can have these densities and intensities that we're introducing, but with the update and adoption of the LDC update, a couple months after this adoption, they would have to, in terms of design, meet the requirements of what's around it. So, the third objective in the future land use element is to clearly establish the criteria for doing a comp plan amendment, a future land use map amendment. Our current comp plan does not have those provisions. The only thing that it has now is compatibility, which, compatibility can mean different things to different people depending on who's reading it. So this one, in this update, we've listed out the specific criteria for what needs to be achieved in order to allow that future land use map amendment to happen. We are also specifically requiring that they have a capacity analysis based on the maximum development potential. So 10 years ago, maximum development potential, let's say if you're going from low-density residential to commercial, you're going from 4 units an acre through a 3.0 FAR of the entire 3 acres, as an example. In this updated version, we're saying, well, if you're required to set aside open space, we know you are going to need some land for infrastructure. You don't have to do it based on the max of the total acreage. It's the max density, or FAR, based on the acreage that's developable. So if you have 10 acres and half of it is wetlands, there's no need to multiply that entire acreage for development because you can't develop in wetlands anyway. And then stating per statute that we can't approve any map amendments that's going to proliferate urban sprawl. The fourth objective deals with managing growth. You're going to start to see from this slide forward that the whole effort here is planning for active, healthy communities where our residents can get very safely and quickly to like activities and things that they could enjoy daily, shopping, going to the grocery store, going to doctor's appointments, going to work, things like that. So we're trying to put policies in there that specifically directs growth and development to areas that are either fully served by municipal services or that the city plans on providing those services so that we are, per statute, maximizing our investments in our public infrastructure. We also want to make sure that we're growing sustainably. So the fifth objective deals with making sure that our land use decisions, both for public and private changes and projects, look at walkability, context sensitivity, multimodal transportation, making sure that those community programs are in place that our residents can access, and putting forth the notion of having a 15-minute city, biking, walking, what have you, that we're going to look at the distribution of housing and the housing types, which you'll hear about in a moment in the housing element, so that our residents can get to where they want to go in a safe manner within 15 minutes. To do that, we have to make those decisions to make sure that we distribute resources throughout the city so that everybody has equal access. And of course, reducing heat island effects. Sixth objective is fostering economic vitality. Everything that we do now that speaks to improving our neighborhoods, improving our businesses and their abilities to get customers by increasing foot traffic, which you'll hear in the transportation element, changing the levels of service so that there's more foot traffic and bicycle traffic. People tend to see things and they like it, they stop, and they go to those stores. So all of that is to help improve our economic vitality, having and requiring different uses that complement each other so that that one trip to that one location, someone could get there, park, and drive around, walk around and go to different stores. We're also looking at putting in policies that require developments to provide public amenities and benefits such as little plazas, urban parks, pocket parks, things like that, so that people can drive there, bike there, walk there, and hang out there and walk around and shop. We also are obligated by the state to maintain our environmental systems. So we have some policies in the future land use element that are echoed in the drainage sub-element and the conservation element that deals with making sure that we protect our natural communities. And then the last objective in the future land use element is making sure that we take advantage of any type of new technologies or new engineering solutions so that we are ensuring that as our sites get developed, that we're doing it in as sustainable a way as possible. So looking at minimizing exposure of our residents to flood hazards, requiring our developers to look at the structural soundness and integrity of their existing buildings and making those improvements, and then continuing to implement and add flood mitigation strategies in the land development code. So with that, that is the future land use element, and I'll turn the mic over now to Tori and Bernice. They'll cover the housing element.
Okay. A little bit higher because the notch is a shorty. Okay, you guys can hear me okay? Okay, I have a tendency of being a little soft-spoken. But okay, so tonight I'll be covering the housing element. As a refresher, the housing element has one goal, which is that the city shall create opportunities and programs that provide guidance and resources in order to provide an adequate supply of safe, affordable, and quality housing to meet the diverse housing needs of our current and future residents, as well as our special housing needs. Okay, so for objective 1, attractive cities, through the Land Development Code, the city will implement a Live Here, Grow Here program in which it will be a way of attracting more young people to the city. This will be done by providing quality housing that's accessible to different types of jobs, shopping, entertainment, and so forth, as well as making sure those amenities are accessible through different means of transportation. Policies include having an assessment of our housing stock, so looking at different types of housing, age, value, et cetera, to see where they are in the city and what needs they might have. And then as well as incentivize quality, diverse housing typologies within a quarter mile of jobs, shopping, entertainment, et cetera, to promote more of an active community. So for objective 2, protection of residential character, the city will encourage development that is focused on protecting our residential areas. They'll do this through discouraging through traffic, use of active code enforcement, and prioritizing residential infill. The city will, again, have its assessment of the housing stock in addition to its code and future land use map, using all of those elements together to prevent or eliminate residential blight along our major corridors. Policies for this objective include eliminating substandard substandard housing. If there are substandard housing, we'll see if there's opportunities to improve the structural soundness of the home, requiring developments that result in the displacement of residents to provide some kind of plan for relocation of said residents, as well as requiring that new residential developments utilize more grid-like patterns, increase connectivity to roadways, as well as avoid dead-end streets. Sorry.
That was grid, not grip.
Sorry.
I think it says
Yes.
grip.
Yes.
Grid, okay.
Oh, grip, yeah. My apologies. Okay, so for objective 3, improving housing quality and diversity, the city will make its best effort to ensure that our residential neighborhoods have a stable quality of life. Policies to meet this objective include looking at the different distributions of housing types, our single-family, townhome, multifamily, et cetera, looking at where those are in the community and finding ways of connecting them. Other policies include having housing that meets the needs of every stage of life for young adults, singles, elderly individuals, et cetera, as well as incentivizing programs that enable residents to live more active lives. Having communities include more walkable and bikeable routes that are accommodating for both a range of ages and able bodies. For objective 4, quality, affordable housing, the city, through the future land use map and its land development code, will support housing diversity and eliminate barriers to affordable housing. Policies include housing for very low, moderate income households, requiring that medium, high-density developments comply with our mobility element, as well as our architectural standards within the Land Development Code, providing incentives for programs for qualifying projects such as expedited permitting, as well as prioritizing infrastructure for these areas that have more vulnerable populations. And for Objective 5, senior and special population housing, the city will ensure that there is a variety of different housing options for our seniors, elderly, and other special populations, so they may age in grace and peace in our community and live a healthy, active life. Policies for this include housing for these people to have, I'm so sorry, let me start over. Policies for this objective include having these housing options in locations that are accessible to different types of amenities, again, being in close proximity to shopping, dining, and entertainment, as well as encouraging a more high-density development to ensure that all of these needs are met. And Tori's going to go ahead and cover our last objective.
All right, I'm going to cover Objective 6, which is the protection and preservation of historic structures and sites. So the state of Florida, for comp plans, we are required to list to do an inventory of historic homes. But traditionally, this is where our historic properties have been listed and where they are housed in the comp plan. So appropriate to the centennial year, I was able to take a deep dive into our historic properties. And I started with the list from, what was it, our 2003 comp plan? So started with that list and started going through that, found that 3 of the properties have been demolished, but I identified some additional properties that are historic. And I'm very careful where I use the word preservation, so this is not a preservation policy. However, in the historic preservation world, there is a big push to identify properties that aren't just architecturally exquisite properties, but really have significance to communities. And so I have added some properties to the list that help to cover all of Ocoee's story and the stories of all residents are represented. So that was kind of the first big push. So we have a revised list. And then some of our policies are to promote the protection of these properties. That could be through rehabilitation, restoration, reconstruction, and preservation. And then these properties can be used to educate our own citizens and regionally about Ocoee's history. And then we have a policy that provides that we would connect property owners with assistance, be it tax incentives or grants, to help upkeep historic properties. And then the last policy is, sorry, I can't read what I wrote down. We want to promote the reuse of historic properties as a sustainable choice. And I believe I covered it. Oh, and then the last one. Any city-owned historic properties, sites, we'd like to make those as available to the public as possible. You know, with Withers McGuire, we have that open a few days a week, but we have some historic sites that we'd like to utilize as a benefit to the public. That was the last policy. Thanks.
Good evening, Ginger Corliss. I had the opportunity to really work on the draft for the recreation open space, and I think that's because I really am passionate for parks. It's where I started in my career over 40 years ago, and so this is special to me. We have one goal, and we have 6 objectives, and that goal really speaks to providing a comprehensible system, a system that's accessible, it is inclusive, it's sustainable, and that we also address, again, this theme you're going to be hearing, the health, wellness, and overall well-being of people of all ages and abilities within our community. The objective number 1 is actually my longest objective, as well as the number of policies I have in it, because it really speaks to the how to plan a comprehensive system. In the past, recreational planning was done based on one standard that basically, whether you were a municipality of 25,000 or 250,000 or a county, all had the same standards. Well, those standards have changed in how we're assessing recreational space, the components to that. We now on a national level, and something we are recommended to do and to follow, is that there are benchmarks to be able to, excuse me, measure our success, so to speak, or our programs based on like similar municipalities. And that is a really, we've come a long way in recreational planning to be able to do that. But this objective also speaks to those pieces of understanding that recreation is important to people of all ages, whether it is in childhood development or senior programs and keeping our minds active. Please go. It's about connectivity of how we're getting to our parks and having trails and greenways to be able to, be able to be in nature. Planning and recreational planning will really change actually during COVID and really understand the importance of our outdoor and spaces are to our not just physical well-being, but our mental and social well-being as well. When we take a look at some of the summaries, this really goes on the planning aspect. So not only am I recommending this new standard of planning, so to speak, but also we need to update our master plan, which has not been done since 2001. So one of the major recommendations is that we tackle that component to that. We're also here to speak to our level of service. The recommendation here is that on level of service, we currently are at 4 acres per thousand. We are recommending that we go to 8 acres per thousand. Currently, based on our inventory of those parks that are developed, as well as 3 that are undeveloped but are working towards development, we're at 10.03 acres. So we're already exceeding that 8. So kicking to 8 is no big deal. We even meet it when we don't have that developed properties included, undeveloped properties included. But we also want to strive by 2045, as we're getting, we're now over that 50,000, going towards that 74,000, that we need to also be increasing that acreage per thousand of our population. We also are going to be talking about the number of parks. This is kind of a new norm to be able to take a look, is that how many parks do we have per thousand population? So right now we're basically at a little over 2,000. We want to strive for 2,300. This is more of kind of just a locational issue too. Where are those parks located, and accessibility, which I'll be getting into in a second. My second objective is health and well-being, and it's important that, again, it's not all about running or our sports games. It's about making sure that we have programs and facilities that support healthy living, that supports from the standpoint of how do we get active, looks at indoor as well as outdoor facilities and programs, as well as other resources that are in the community. Parks and recreation centers specifically are ways where people can come together of all different types of backgrounds and understand each other. So it really helps that social wellness is so important. But we also speak to environmental awareness and appreciation. Part of the health and well-being is not just of us as individuals, but also making sure that we educate our community on the importance of being good stewards to our natural environment. Objective 3 is access, accessibility, and connectivity. Excuse me. Here, when I speak to access and accessibility, they are different. Access means that we are trying to provide different type of variety or diversity of programs and activities and facilities so that we are increasing the diversity of those that are participating in the programs in thus far. We also are trying to strive for access. And here I think it's something that's very important, that we can have a park, but how are we getting there? Are there trails or either sidewalks even be able to get to these parks? So when we talk about connectivity and accessibility, they kind of go hand in hand. We need to connect our neighborhoods to our parks and also make sure that inside those parks that they are accessible, whether that we're looking at ADA facilities or whether we're looking at other components to that we're making them welcome. One of the other things that we think about and sometimes don't think about is having a very close access to a green space. So in the policies for Objective 3, we speak to a program that's been initiated by the Trust for Public Land, and that is the 10-minute walk. One of the things that we are striving for by 2045 is to have a park within a 10-minute walk, which is about a half a mile, to every residence within the city. To do that, thank you, is that we also must look at not just public or what we provide as a city, but also private, those components to that. Facility planning and development. Here we go, how are we building our parks? How are we looking at maintaining them? We need to make sure that when we have them, we have a consistent standard to them. We are making sure that we're employing green industries from the standpoint of employing nature-based solutions, of looking at different ways, of really being the leader. So when we're looking at the landscape, how can we really increase the biodiversity of our pollinators within that? We do it within our parks. How can we actually train people to look at how they might handle stormwater differently? We do it in our parks from the standpoint of development, whether it be rain gardens or bioswales, is making sure we integrate proper planning techniques within our parks and recreation facilities so that we can demonstrate that it works. And again, we're becoming good stewards of those resources that we have within our community, both from the standpoint of programs and facilities, but also the environment. Objective 5 is resource management, sustainability, and stewardship. We're recommending that a management plan be developed for each of our parks. That means, what are those natural resources that we have? How are we going to be able to take care of them? Looking at such programs is exotic eradication, making sure that we're taking care and replanting native plant materials where we've kind of taken out those exotics and so forth. But really understanding here is how parks goes hand in hand in our conservation, within our drainage, and a lot of the different aspects of just keeping our community safe and sustainable. My last objective is financial planning and basically funding. We need to be able to do these things. We need to have the financial resources to do such. So here we're looking at such as the capital budget, but also looking at non-traditional ways, not just grants, but also private partnerships, other components, and different facilities and access and programs to increase our funding for parks with that. And with that, that actually ends our chapter 1. Are you going to do questions now?
Okay, that was a lot. So our first 3 elements, do you guys have questions? Anything like that?
Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I have a couple of them. I noticed with the housing, we were talking about multimodal access. Are we starting to work with Lynx about getting some of those bus locations back into Ocoee? I know we used to have some back in the day, and then they pretty much said we don't have the ridership to keep them up. So now as we're starting to look at this plan for 4045, are we revisiting the bus
One
system?
of the, which I'll present in just in the next segment, in the mobility element, one of the policy directions is for the city to develop a transportation plan, not just the transportation road systems, but a transportation plan for how we're going to achieve providing for public transportation access to see if we can try to provide better public transportation services. So it may not be that we can convince Lynx to add a route here because there's not the ridership to support it, but it may be opportunities to improve that last mile for our residents. So they may be more inclined and it may be easier for them to get to a bus stop if they know that there's shade along the way or there are sitting down areas along the way, and that the shelters that we do have are the bus stops that we do have are at least sheltered. So the next step will be to develop that transportation plan to get more public service transportation to our residents.
Okay. Second question, what about a citywide Wi-Fi? Are we looking at all about that? I know when we talk about living and working from home, most young people now are working jobs that are basically through the internet and things. So are we going to, I know we've taken, at least at one point, we'd taken the Wi-Fi out of the city park because people were plugging into it and using it the wrong way, but are we looking at getting back into having some Wi-Fi so that when people are out and about, they can still be connected and still be able to do their jobs?
That's not something that we've looked at in the comp plan. I don't know if that's something that it would live in the comp plan. It may be some sort of agreement that we could consider, but right now, that's not what we're proposing.
Okay. And then the other question, and this one, I guess, is always just been a bug of mine, and that is bike lanes. When we talk about them, are we going to separate them from the roads? And this has always been, I know they have the bike lane along Silver Star, and I got into it one time with the DOT on that, and I said, I tell you what, you get the head of the DOT to bring his grandkid here and ride her bike down to the elementary school along Silver Star and tell me that's okay and it's safe. And they weren't real happy with me. We need to do something about having safe bike lanes.
Yes.
And that means separating them somehow, even if it's a small sidewalk in between, but we need to separate them somehow. The other thing is we need wide sidewalks. If you're talking about having a park within a half-mile's distance, parents, when they're walking their children, their small children, are going to probably be pushing a carriage while they still have someone on a bicycle next to them. There has to be enough room on those sidewalks for people to go in both directions. And the
Yes.
4-foot, 5-foot, even 6-foot sidewalks, that's really close. So something else that really needs to be looked at when we start figuring how that should be working in these plans.
I
And that's it.
absolutely agree. So, all very good points. As planners, we agree with that. There's definitely a need for safety. There's a lot of what you just mentioned in the mobility element, which we'll get into in that chapter. Yes, go ahead, Ginger.
I also want to say it is also addressed in the policies in the rec and open space element, especially when I say
Yes.
trails. Trails mean a lot of different things, so we speak to complete streets, making sure we have the wide walks similar to how we have here, and understanding those components. So we do address the notion that connectivity of safe access. So as we're looking at our projects, we are not just from the comp plan, but I will tell you now in our implementation process and our capital work, we're looking that way. So yes, that is part of that, is how do we provide safe access for those, whether you're a bicyclist, either being those that love to zip through and commuting on your bicycle, or you're a recreational biker, as well as making sure when we call something that's mixed traffic, is how we make sure we have the appropriate size and definition for that. So yes, we are looking at that.
Thank you.
Mr. Keller, I'll address your transportation questions when we get to the mobility element. Any other questions on the future land use, housing, or rec and open space elements?
Well, I guess I have one. So looking at the 8 to 10.2 parks per 1,000 people, what's the national average right now? What's Winter Gardens, Poplar, what do they look like?
From the standpoint of the national average, they're giving for different similar cities. Basically, those are that number I gave you. So when I'm saying 1,000 per one park for 2032, that is a standard. So that's what I'm playing. The standard that we have now for 2045 comes from the national standard based on then a population of 74,000. So when I provide those in the policies, I do so based on today's national standard, but know that they will change in time, not just from the standpoint of what the trend is today, but trends will change.
Cool.
I had some notes earlier, but I forgot to put my page numbers on. That's why I'm going between my little phone here, my computer, and this thing over here. Did you go over this activity centers? Was that within the PU? Was that within the mixed use?
No, so.
Okay, so
Yes, the activity center, right now, the activity centers live in the data analysis portion of the future land use element. With the Ocoee Regional Sports Complex, we did a text amendment to move the list of activity centers from the data analysis portion to fall under commercial. And so when you go to that section in the GOPS, in the Goals and Objectives Policy document, under Professional Offices, Services, and Commercial, that's where we kept it from the text amendment that was done last year for, was it last year? My goodness, for the Ocoee Regional Sports Complex. So all of that language that you see there for the Northwest Center, the Northwest Activity Center, is the language that the commission approved specifically for Ocoee Regional Sports Complex. But if other activity centers were to want to come online, it would fall under the commercial land use category.
Okay. For some reason, I thought I had it under mixed use. Okay. All right.
Right. No other
For the
questions?
next section, yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter. It's the infrastructure element, and that infrastructure element is separated into two sub-elements. The first one is utilities. So Jen Boulding, our utilities director, is going to come present on that.
Hi there. I have a couple notes here. You have to keep me on track because I love utilities and I love to talk about it. What button am I hitting here? Notch to change. This one? Okay, so I'd like to talk to you today about the utilities section of the infrastructure. And as we go through these, just keep in mind that there are numerous regulations that we have to abide by, but also the city has a long-standing sustainability policy. It's really an integrated water resources plan. Can you hear me? So we want to make sure that our utilities are expanding and that it's very intentional. It's efficient from a growth management standard, but also from an operations and also with our customers. So the first objective is the expansion of utility services, and this ensures that we expand efficiently, but that we also maintain a minimum level of service. As with the previous comp plan and consistent with other municipalities, new development pays for its cost of upsizing and expansion of the utility lines to serve itself. But this is a coordinated and a data-driven effort with Utilities Department, again, to make sure that it is intentional. We want to make sure what infrastructure goes in the ground serves our existing customers, the new customer, but also that additional customers can connect as well. So it's basically smart growth. The next round of policies ensure that we have established user fees to cover the maintenance costs, both in the distribution system and also in the treatment process. And part of those costs also go to numerous regulatory requirements on a national and a state level. This includes maintaining the incline block rate structure that you'll see on your water bills. Usage increases as consumption increases. Also ensuring that we comply with our bond covenants as we have large projects that we have to borrow money. Debt service obligations, and a theme throughout the city is promoting water conservation or efficiency. So we've broken up our utilities into water, sewer, and reclaim to ensure that we focus on each individual need. So this objective ensures that we have an adequate level of service and that we have potable water capacity available for new development. It's important that we focus on maximizing the use of our existing utility infrastructure and that we emphasize planning and implementing projects in a timely manner. This objective involves promotion of water conservation Water conservation is important for numerous respects. The first is that if you use water efficiently, then you reduce the impacts to the utility, you reduce the need to construct new infrastructure. I should also mention that, so the city is in the St. Johns River Water Management District jurisdiction, and we are also in the Central Florida Water Initiative. And the Central Florida Water Initiative is a water caution area. We have additional regulations on us that involve the efficient use of groundwater and the development of alternative water supplies. We have water supply planning requirements. We have what's called the 10-year water supply facility work plan. The water management district on a state level requires that the water management districts prepare a regional water supply plan. And from those water supply plans, each municipality within that plan must come up with a planning document. And in this document, that is where we determine a lot of our capital improvements projects to ensure that we're going to be able to meet future water demands. So this involves not only alternative water supply planning with reclaimed water, but at some point we may need to look at going to surface water. Partnering with other utilities is really imperative. So this again is that concept of an integrated water resource plan, that we're not only focusing on water quality and water quantity, we're looking at sustainability across the board for water, sewer, and reclaimed water. Also, as part of the objectives, the state of Florida is requiring the either elimination or upgrade of, we call them on-site. It's basically a septic tank. We call them OSTDS, so it's a septic tank. So we are mandated by the state to come up with a remediation program to either limit or remove, and also to expand our sanitary sewer system. So next is the wastewater service. It's very similar to the water service in terms of our objectives. Our policies are a little bit different because we have additional treatment requirements on this. And we have to, again, with the septic tanks, meet what they call a basin action management plan. And probably I'm going back and forth a little bit, but everything in utilities now overlaps. It used to be you had water, sewer, and reclaim, but now they all overlap because you have water quality and water quantity. So we have a lot of these plans. So you'll see I'll talk about septic tanks, right? And that reduces nitrogen. We'll talk about efficient use of water. We'll talk about the wastewater treatment plant. We'll talk about expanding services. So a lot of these policies you'll see overlap. We've already gone through the nutrients. So the last provision is reclaimed water service. So the city requires that all new development install reclaimed water lines. We also promote the expansion of the reclaimed water where feasible. We maintain several agreements for the wholesale purchase of reclaimed water. And I just want to point out that reclaimed water is really a valuable resource. It serves a dual purpose, not only for the disposal of treated wastewater, but also to conserve groundwater. So as we move forward, I think you're going to see some changes in the reclaim program. And we try to ensure that these policies will support that. That's it for me.
Okay. All right, so the second sub-element in the infrastructure element is the drainage. So when you look at the drainage sub-element, it's basically stormwater and how we manage runoff as, from different projects and the rain and whatnot. So the entire goal of the drainage sub-element is to protect water quality of our water bodies, waterways, the aquifer, to increase flood resiliency, to promote aquifer recharge, and to manage our city's stormwater infrastructure. So this is a really long goal, a really long objective. You saw this objective last year. It's just been expanded a little bit more to include the stormwater master plan. But the purpose of that first objective, and I don't know why I'm trying to pretend like I can read without my glasses. So, the policies, the implementing policies in this objective is really about creating first mapping our drainage infrastructure via GIS as part of the city stormwater management plan update. The next one is to actually, the other policy is to actually do the update to the stormwater management plan. The goal here is to update our studies and then develop new basin-specific watershed master plans for all of the basins that are in the city by 2045, so that we can identify any deficiencies in those areas and also make recommendations for improvements, and then continuing to implement the stormwater plan and in order to maintain our level of service. And level of service in this instance is helping to not make flood conditions worse, but helping to reduce lower flood-prone buildings and areas. Drainage objective 2 deals with water quality. The policies in this objective tie into some of the policies in the conservation element, which is going to be coming up later on. Basically, it's policies that require the city to monitor our water levels and water quality, implementing best management practices in order to reduce non-native and less desirable aquatic plants. As Jen mentioned, there's regulations. We are required to be compliant with NPDES, it's National Pollutant something load. Our floodplains, our public works staff over there can correct anything that I'm not saying correctly, but I used to know what NPDES is right off the top, but it's just gone now. But the goal of this is to protect water quality, so surface water and groundwater. Enhancing recharge, making sure that post conditions aren't worse than pre conditions, and then implementing strategies to reduce impervious surface areas and minimizing site disturbances. So as we know development and construction is going to happen, we want to put policies in place to lessen the negative impacts of those construction activities. Objective 3 deals primarily with flood resiliency. As this body is aware, we updated our land development code last year. It might have been the year before now, it seems so long ago, to update our floodplains management ordinance. This is saying that we're going to continue to implement that ordinance, and when it's possible, make additional upgrades to code or changes to code to better our resiliency. The fourth objective is agency coordination. There are agencies that operate within or have some jurisdiction within our city limits, federal, state, and regional agencies. So we want to make sure that we coordinate with them when we have projects or activities that might impact something that they have to deal with. We also want to make sure that we're staying compliant with the Ocoee Protection Act. And also, this is to, if we play nice with our sister agencies, maybe they can help us with funding. So some of those policies are in here as well. So that is pretty much chapter 3. It's all about infrastructure. That's as pretty as we can make infrastructure look. Do you have questions on infrastructure?
Just so there's a clear record, NPDES is National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System.
Thank you.
I think, you have a question?
I was going to ask a couple of questions, if I may, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. One of them on the reclaim water. I know at one point there was talk that there wasn't enough reclaimed water for us to buy as much as we need. Is that still the case in the county, or has that been eliminated?
So, Mike Grimmer, Assistant City Manager. Commissioner, we really want to keep the questions to I know this is a growth issue, but we want to be cognizant. We may be giving an update to the City Commission April 1st. So there's some things with reclaim that I just don't want to answer in this public setting that we haven't, so I just want to be careful.
Okay,
So
yeah,
there-
well, I guess what I'm getting at is, are we gonna be able to continue going with reclaimed water, or is it something where we're gonna run into the issue of, we're planning for it, but we're never gonna get it?
The policies that were written were really to ensure that we do. We have a requirement based on the consumptive use permit to continue to look for partnerships with reclaimed water. We're always exploring alternative water supply sources. So we have the policies and the framework in place, and it will be something that we will continue to do, that every municipality will do. And it's not just reclaimed water. Municipalities look at surface water, they look at stormwater reuse. Some utilities even have stormwater reuse, say a gas station puts in a lined stormwater pond. So that's what those policies would support, because it's not even just what you have available today. The idea is to plan for the future, which is why we put in dual line irrigation systems or distribution systems, so that when these sources become available, that you can connect.
And then, do we have any help coming from state or federal as far as getting off of the septic systems and getting on? I know we're talking about getting away from those, but is there a path that we can do that economically, or is this pipe dream?
No, it's not. We have policies in place that would support these projects when funding becomes available, and on the state level, they do sometimes have money available. And I'll tell you, aside from the comp plan and utilities department, I mean, it's a policy in the comp plan, but it's a policy in the utilities department that we are always exploring grants. And so, yeah, it just depends on what the state wants to fund and what EPA wants to fund. But all the policies are in place, and all of the programs to ensure that we continue to look for these funding sources are all in place.
So now are we, and I guess the only last question, are we looking at new development putting in for septic, for sewer, even if they're not going to be able to be connected back to the city yet? Or are we?
They're required to install sewer. The only time that we allow septic tanks, there are certain lot sizes that are in the land development code that I don't know off the top of my head, but all planned developments are required to connect. So there are just exceptions. So for example, say that you're a lot and you're not close to any of the city facilities, and so you're like a one-off, single-family residential, then you would be required to meet the state requirements for your septic tank, and you may have a well. And as we talk about the intentional growth, and as growth expands from the main corridor, then you will be required to connect at some point in time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think this is a good time. Oh, you got a question?
Of course.
Oh,
Go
man,
ahead.
wait a minute, you let a notch off so easy.
I'll let you have one.
No, this is easy. In your presentation, you mentioned that you would, I think you said, recommend or require a developer to use reclaimed water if it's available. Was it required or recommended?
Well, it's required.
Required.
But there is in the land development code, we have sort of like a certain distance that you are required to connect. And say you're doing a development and you have a really high demand, in that case, we would recommend that you extend those lines. But if it comes outside of what our land development and our policies are, we have some cases where maybe someone's just on the outskirt and their demand's not that high. And a lot of times what happens is they are desperate for reclaimed water when they.
Okay. Now, a couple of weeks ago, there was a gentleman that came here and spoke about natural gas. Basically, he says, look, he was basically begging us to say, look, if natural gas is available as an alternative energy, we should require the developers to use it. I kind of like the idea, because if it's there, why not make it available? I mean, the homeowner doesn't have to use it, but it should be in the subdivision. Have that conversation been to you guys from that?
That would not be me. I'll be honest, I'm water, sewer, and reclaim.
Well,
Stay in your lane, Lou.
So I'm not sure that
note
even the
says
city has a
utilities.
jurisdiction, but
She's not in, she's water.
My note says utilities. I don't know the difference.
Mike, Assistant City Manager, functionally, if you put in reclaim lines, we jump it with potable water. If you put in sewer lines, you're not jumping the sewer lines.
Gotcha.
If it's on septic and you make them put sewer line, those sewer lines are just sitting there with nothing happening. So it's a little bit different. That's why, so we make new developments, put in reclaim, even though reclaim's nowhere near it, and they jump it with potable water. So at such time, but it's not the same with sewer lines.
Oh, I get that part.
So-
I'm on natural gas now.
We don't, yeah, we're not.
Okay.
We don't- we don't
So if it's available, you're not requiring the developer to bring it to the complex?
What we do is, the natural gas company is made apprised of every development plan, and they decide how they want to go forward from there.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't just 2 meetings ago that they came and said, we would like to participate in a different and alternative way for new construction.
Correct.
Didn't discuss all the existing people, what our plan is, so.
I did. All right, I think this is a good time to take a break. Let's take a 5-minute bio break. We're halfway through, right? So, Kel, do you have a question or?
Yeah, no, I was just, if you could go back to the, I believe it was the first slide. It was just talking, something about new developments.
Which element?
On the
Oh,
first element, yeah.
Okay. Me?
Yeah, if you could just, on point number 1 there, just what were those, what were the limited circumstances?
The limited circumstances were, for example, if you're a single-family home and you're not in close proximity to any
Oh, right,
water
right.
or sewer lines. But if you're a development, you would be required, it might require a lift station.
Right. Perfect, yeah, I missed that. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, let's take a little break, 5 minutes.
I didn't see anything wrong with what Kennedy said, is what I'm saying.
It was just too early.
For both.
With 3 seconds to spare.
I got more questions.
All right, here we go. Let's go to chapter number 4.
Chapter 4.
I have a couple more questions with regards to drainage.
Oh, I thought you wanted to talk utilities.
Oh, no, I'm clear with that, with reclaim stuff. May I?
No, we moved past that.
But I have questions
Okay,
on
go ahead.
drainage.
One question.
Because I took notes today. I really read all this stuff. There was somewhere in those 100 and somewhat pages that says either the goal is to eventually lessen the use of pond.
Mr. Krug?
Say that, I didn't even hear, I didn't understand.
There is a goal to minimize the use of pond in development.
Using of ponds,
You're
okay.
talking retention ponds?
Yes, correct. I'm assuming that's in drainage, right?
Yes, Steve
Okay.
Krug, Public Works Director. The idea is, there's a lot of innovation out there with alternative methods as opposed to just building a pond and taking up valuable property
Okay.
to hold a retention pond and allow water to just sit there until the solids settle out. So we've been open to some new things. There's been some, what you might see as buried ponds, where some businesses have, in the parking lots, they're basically burying the pond and putting the parking lot on top of it. Almost like a huge septic system, but for stormwater. So it allows a lot more recharge and things like that. So there are a lot of alternatives out there, and also whether there's drainage swales, where you can do some, I can't remember the name of them.
Bioswales?
Bioswales, thank you.
Okay.
So where it's not only just another feature, but it's also provides landscaping and something more than just a paved area marked with a bunch of grass ponds. Just
Okay.
kind of big, sort of, I guess the best way to describe it is if you look at our Unity Park, that's basically a stormwater feature. It is a park, but the
Okay.
main focus was the stormwater, and that incorporated a bunch of different elements to better utilize the property and not just look like something that's just there that nobody can touch.
Okay, so those will eventually be a suggestion to the developer, not necessarily a requirement that you must use an underground system.
Correct.
Okay, because I said that would be a hard thing to do when we talk about affordable housing, which which was explained to us before, when you're forcing a developer.
We're still bound by a lot of the water management district
Gotcha.
rules.
Okay.
But we're always looking for alternative ways to meet those
Okay.
and improve the look of the city at the same time.
Okay.
So, great question.
Oh, see, thank you.
Thank you,
Those are good
Steve.
questions.
Okay, you ready now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, mobility element. All right, same goal as before. We're trying to provide resilient and logically connected multimodal transportation systems to move people and goods. You'll see people is in front on purpose. The first objective, there are only a few objectives in this element. The first one is context-sensitive standards. This objective is the one that actually adopts the level of service standards. In the current comp plan, we have a level of service standard for roadways only with a hope of trying to accommodate for our pedestrians and our bicyclists. In this element, we are actually adopting a standard for bicyclists, bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities. The details of it we presented at the last presentation, but it's basically a level of service context E. Our current operation for roads is E. But it's E based on the context of the corridor, the land uses and the access points, things like that along the corridor. We're also adopting a bicycle and pedestrian facility level of service. Speaking to Mr. Keller's concern regarding bicycle and pedestrian safety, the standard is based on the level of stress of those mode users, being that the closer you are to a car, the higher your level of stress is. Because I know that I've tried to ride my bike on that little narrow strip along the side of the road, and I'm like this the whole time because I'm scared I'm gonna, just turning around to look at a car, I might swerve over. So the whole premise there is to create a greater separation, whether it's a physical separation distance-wise, or putting other physical barriers to protect the bicyclist pedestrians from the roadway. So in this update, we are actually adopting the standard. The goal that we're seeking is either like a 2, meaning that our bike and pedways should be safe enough for the average resident, young adult to travel on those facilities safely. It's not going to be the standard of someone who is in a wheelchair or a toddler bicycling on their own. It's certainly not going to be where it is now, whereas only those who cycle 15, 30 miles a day would feel comfortable on that facility. It's going to be in the middle where the average person can utilize those facilities in a safe way. We're also looking at context-sensitive solutions to improving transportation systems in order to improve our neighborhoods and improving our quality of life. Ginger mentioned in the Parks and Rec element that walkability, the 10-minute mile, the 15-minute city, all of it is based on how we can get our residents to the places that they want to go safely. There are policies that are speaking to connecting residents to commercial, connecting commercial to other uses, connecting commercial to parks, things like that, so that everybody can get to where they want to go safely. And also there's a policy that speaks to how we're going to look at opportunities for parallel facilities so that we're not looking at widening as the only option for increasing capacity. We're looking at alternative routes to create, not just 1 or 2 east-west routes or 1 or 2 north-south routes, but alternative routes as we plan ahead. So one of the goals in this, one of the policies or implementing policies in this objective is to seek out ways to reduce the pressure to widen our roads, which, as we know, widening roads creates more cost. There's additional cost in terms of maintenance. The need to find ponds because the runoff has to go somewhere. So we're looking more towards reducing those kinds of negative impacts associated with travel. So objective 2 is safety and efficiency, but doing it in a resilient way. So the goal is, and I think this body may have heard the Vision Zero trying to reduce the level and severity of fatalities and serious injuries in the city's roadways. This objective is basically that, emphasizing safety for all of our mode users and prioritizing their travel, not just motorist travel. And also looking at supporting micro-mobilities, such as shared bikes, or a bike share program, or a carpool program, those kinds of things where, you're utilizing other means of getting to where you're wanting to go without necessarily jumping into a single occupant vehicle. Looking at emerging technologies, this is number 2 there on the screen, talks about the development of a transportation plan to integrate the needs of our driving population with our non-driving population and meeting their demands safely, looking at a seamless transition between us in Winter Garden, us in Windermere, because roads don't stop at the property line, traffic doesn't stop at the property line. So we want to make sure that if we are planning something that's going to provide a nice pedestrian connection to the next jurisdiction, we should be talking to our sister cities to make sure that their side is receiving that traffic in a safe way. There's a policy that I added in here, and I guess I'm just going to say it's kind of selfish. There's a policy that I included that speaks to the city providing or developing a information to educate all mode users of their rights and their responsibilities, and what their roles are in making sure that everybody travels safely. So if you're a pedestrian, you should be using a sidewalk. You should not be in the bike lane where cars are coming or a bicyclist is coming, because if a bicyclist has to avoid a pedestrian who's in the wrong spot, that person might get struck by a car. So it's not just looking at bicycle and pedestrian safety by itself, it's looking at everybody's safety, and everybody needs to stay in their own lane, essentially. Objective 3 is coordination of transportation and land use. We want to make sure that when we do those map amendments, that we're also looking at how that impacts transportation. We want to make sure that when we do comp plan amendments to change the colors on the map, whether it's a comp plan amendment or it's a rezoning, we're looking at the network and making sure that it doesn't operate below the level of service standards for roadways, bike facilities, and pedestrian facilities. Speaking again to connecting, providing bicycle pedestrian connections between residential and commercial, and those uses to civic and public spaces, making sure that our system is connected and cohesive and that is logical. So going back to what you'll hear in a little bit on the LDC, it's not enough to just have architecture along a sidewalk, but there's no connection between that white walk to the building. So people aren't going to just use the white walk if it's there, if there isn't that last connection to connect the white walk to the building. You see some of that in Horizon West, where you've got a nice boulevard, white walks, landscaping, nice building elevations with doors, but you can't get to those buildings because there's no connections. So you'll hear when we talk about the landscape code, the land development code, we're making those connections in terms of design. Objective 4 deals with the fiscal efficiency of our transportation systems. One of the policies speaks to requiring the city to identify and map the needed right-of-way to make sure that when we do have a transportation improvement that's needed, as projects are coming in, we are slowly accumulating and acquiring, whether it's, hopefully it's just by dedication, the right-of-way needed to improve our facilities. And when we do improve our facilities, we will be looking at trying to make those complete streets so that all mode users will have a path of travel. We want to try to reduce our vehicle miles traveled. That's one lingo. There's also reducing the number of trips. So if you get in the car once, you drive to one location, that location has so many things that it's meeting your needs, so you don't have to get in a car and go to another location, and get in a car and go to another location within miles of each other. So the goal of this one is to try to make our system our existing system efficient and our future systems efficient as well. Going back to Mr. Keller's concern about the right-of-way and the space and the closeness of those modes interacting with each other. Right now, our LDC has a minimum right-of-way of only 50 feet. When you consider even dropping down to an 11-foot travel lane in both directions, plus the utility areas that are needed, or the easement or space needed to provide utilities and providing a wide walk, there's not always that room. So there's always a battle between where should the utility lines go, where should the sidewalks go, where should, all these things have a small space to play with each other. One thing that, since it's in the LDC, we could look at increasing the minimum right-of-way, but the offset to that is the utilities will have a place to go, the trees will have a place to go, but we could lessen the minimum frontage setback so that when you look at it, it all looks the same. What you don't see is where that right-of-way line shifts. But to the built environment, to the eye, would essentially still look the same. Let's see. Florida statutes also requires, to Mr. Keller's point, that we look at providing public transportation. So that is what we will be looking at to, if we can't provide the facilities themselves, because that is links, we don't put enough into the pot with MetroPlan and links to get them to do what we want them to do. But we could at least make sure that should those routes become available, our streets will be ready to have those nice bus stops. I think this is the last objective. Transportation funding, that's always a fun one because everybody's funds and revenues are limited. But if we can strategize on where improvements need to be made, like for example, maybe a resurfacing project might also be a good opportunity to widen the bike lanes. Our city attorney gave an example during the break for cycle tracks. Maybe instead of having two narrow bike lanes on both sides of the road, use that space to provide a two-way bike travel path that's separated, whether it's by a small raised curb, so that there's bicycle travel in both directions in just one spot, so that cars can be aware that bicyclists are over here, cars are over here, pedestrians are over here. So we're all using the same right-of-way width, but more safely. So those are the things that we can look at in terms of when we plan for our infrastructure, when we plan for our infrastructure investments, we can look at those things as we consider our capital improvements budget. And that's the end of that chapter. Do you have any questions on mobility?
Just one. I'm sorry, I'm being the pain tonight, but the one thing that I would say is be careful. We don't want to, when you're looking at being able to get these small areas so that people aren't driving, and the thing that always comes to the back of my mind is Fowler's Grove. When you go shopping, it's amazing how many people need to get in their car, so they were parked by Target so that they now can park by Lowe's. And so even though you've got everything where it's close and you should be walkable, it's not. So when you're planning, please keep that in mind. And then the other thing, and I don't know how we put it into the plan, but something that I think we seriously need to look at is driverless cars. I would not be surprised by 50 or maybe max 60. Most people don't have a driver's license anymore, and everybody rents time like you pay now for internet service. You'll be paying for car service, and the car you'll get so many miles a month on your plan. And when you do it, the driverless car will come and get you and take you where you need to go. So I think that needs to be looked at as well as to what that will do to transportation and people owning vehicles.
Right.
I think you're going to find more fleet than you're going to find actual individual owners going forward.
Correct. I agree with you on that. So some of the things that we talked about in the LDC is creating opportunities in the parking lots for, it's like a little bulb for a curb drop-off. So people, more and more people are using Lyft and those types of services. So if you provide a safe spot for those Lyft drivers to go and identify a safe spot, drop off, pick up people, that's a great thing. I think one of the failures of, because I shop and go to Fowler's Grove quite often, I used to bike there to the Planet Smoothie with my son. One of the challenges of why it's not walkable as it should be is that there's not enough traffic control on that internal road. It's not a designated right-of-way tract. It's not a tract, it's just an internal, a paper street, basically. And there aren't enough traffic controls to cause cars, to make cars stop and yield to the pedestrians. That's why it's safer to cross, to go from Target to Chicago, Uno's Pizza, and those other places by car, because when you're in your car, you feel a little bit safer, but it causes more people to get back into their cars. One of the things that we, Tori and Ginger and I, have talked about a lot is how do we get people to circulate on a site? And it's not enough to just put all the parking in one spot. It has to flow. And maybe it's to the detriment of not being able to put as many trees so that we can get pedestrians across the street safer. So I do agree with you on that. We don't have that many places left in the city that are of that size, but we are definitely looking at the pedestrian movement in the LDC update.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm done. So-
Just a comment. In the document, it says something about promoting 55 and older, emission mobility, and it also says by 2045, we could be looking at 70,000 plus residents. And you also mentioned the Lynx buses. Obviously, we can't build every road, that a Lynx bus would fit, but any thought, maybe 10 years down the road, that we may have an inner-city contract with Lynx for the smaller buses to move people around before those driverless cars come around?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Lynx, in my experience, and Ginger and I did quite a bit of public outreach work, interviewing riders, interviewing drivers, working and having meetings with Lynx executive team. At the end of the day, it's cheaper to build it than it is to maintain it. So for them, unless there's a dedicated funding source for maintenance, it's very, very challenging to get them to extend the route.
We couldn't contract them for the inner city buses. I'm saying this to say because I've seen it at work. I was in, I think, Tamarack about a month ago, and on the west side, I've seen those smaller buses. Clearly, they're inner city buses, probably contracted through the Broward County Transit, division, which is comparable to Lynx. So
I think the best answer that I have is that until we can get our transportation and pedestrian bike network as friendly as possible, until we can make that last mile as convenient as possible, choice riders are going to choose not to ride public transit.
Gotcha. Okay.
Next element?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, chapter 5 is the environment-friendly, resilient, sustainable community. And I'm going to tag team with Seth. Do you want to do the whole thing?
No.
Okay.
That's great. Okay. Wait, do I get a...
So Seth and I will tag team. This is the duo that you saw when we did the floodplains ordinance. So the goal, we want to protect our natural resources as much as we can. Again, don't know why I'm trying to do this without my glasses. So protecting natural resources through preservation, rehabilitation, and construction of natural and artificial ecosystems. Doing that by protecting our environment, we're also protecting human life and human health. We want to make sure that our surface waters, groundwaters, our air quality, all those things, our wildlife, their habitats, their nesting areas, their foraging areas, their migration areas, we're looking at all of those things. So the first objective is minimizing development impacts. Seth.
Okay, so minimizing development impacts, the city shall promote green development initiatives and low-impact development stormwater management through the implementation of the Land Development Code to conserve energy and to protect the city's natural resources through energy-efficient and sustainable construction practices and projects that minimize air, water, noise, and light pollution during the construction process and for the life of the building or structure. So our goal here is just to protect everyone and everything around us. You have a right to clean air. We want to minimize the amount of pollution that is going into our atmosphere, especially at the ground level. We want to minimize the noise pollution because you want to be able to enjoy your family time when you're at home or when you're in a park. We want to minimize the light pollution because it is everyone's right to enjoy a beautiful night sky at their home in their backyard rather than having to take a cruise to the middle of the ocean to see the Orion's Belt. And you have a right to having access to clean water, whether it's potable water that you're drinking or recreational water that you're playing in or groundwater that you might be pumping. And conservation, Objective 1, minimize development impacts, really weaves its way throughout all the other elements within the comp plan because it is such an important feature of our everyday life.
Yes, a notable feature that we have here is the establishment of an urban forest management plan. I believe we shared at the August presentation that the technology is there to where we know that there's about 30% of our canopy in the city. We're introducing in this element update a goal to take that to 50% by 2045. So I just want to make sure that also lends to achieving the green spaces that's in the rec and open space element. It speaks to creating that nice, pleasing public realm because we're in Florida. No one's going to really enjoy their outdoors if it's blistering hot.
That's correct. And the urban canopy or the tree canopy throughout Florida is on average at 36%. So the city is already below the state average at 30, as not said 30% plus or minus 2%. But we would also, northern Florida, north of the central Florida and in the Panhandle is all above 40%. And in this type of very humid and near tropical climate, we have the ability to have such vegetation in order to keep us cool, to minimize urban heat island, to keep our air quality clean because vegetation and trees help reduce particulate matter, which leads to asthma, and it just provides a nice and cohesive and beautiful environment both for humans and for our wildlife neighbors.
So Objective 2 is water quality protection, again, mentioned in the future land use element and in the drainage element, implementing NPDES standards, complying with the Ocoee Basin Management Action Plan and the Oklahoma Basin Management Plan, regulating development activities to protect our natural water cleansing features, reducing pollutant load, like Seth mentioned, promoting low-impact development standards, and then just basically following best management practices to minimize impacts to our aquifer, especially the areas where there's a high recharge to the aquifer. Anything else to add on that one?
No, that was good.
Okay. Floodplains and wetlands.
The city shall protect and conserve its functionally and environmentally significant wetlands, hydric soils, and flood-prone areas from physical and hydrological alterations through enforcement of flood hazard avoidance regulations, directing incompatible land uses away from wetlands, and, where appropriate, creation of one-lot plots and placement of such areas into the conservation future land use designation. So, we were up here in June with our floodplain management ordinance, and this is, giving more credence to what we were working towards with that, because wetlands are an important feature to, of course, our city and our environment. They are one of the most diverse ecosystems that we have, maybe behind a rainforest, and they provide a natural source for our stormwater to go and store and get treated. If we remove all of our wetlands, then we increase our risk of flooding throughout the city.
All right, objective 4, species and habitat protection. So caring for our bugs and bunny friends. Basically, the implementing policies there is to make sure that we do continue to protect our wildlife species and their habitats and where they migrate, nest, and forage for food, preserving the biologically diverse communities that we have in our freshwater systems, preserving existing native trees, and then maintaining a GIS record of where those environmentally sensitive lands are. One thing that's added here that's not there that I really like is preserving and including pollinators. So bees, butterflies, all those things that help to pollinate our landscaping, or in our landscaping. Air quality.
So the city shall support efforts to improve air quality as a means to protect human and environmental health by seeking plans and investments that reduce the release of air toxins, including the criteria pollutants and urban heat island effects, which in turn help to lessen or mitigate the impacts of changing climate conditions. So this, goes hand in hand with low impact development and protecting our wetlands. It's reiterating what we need to do to keep our city and community happy, healthy, safe, and vibrant. It's as our whole vision and our comp plan is a happy, healthy, and safe community. Some ways to get to having clean air, especially at this surface level, is we can coordinate with other municipalities and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to implement up-to-date air quality best management practices to protect and preserve clean air by pursuing strategies to reduce surface level pollutants from vehicles and development activities. And there's a number of ways that we can protect our air quality through here, down on the surface, such as maybe limiting the amount of clearing that happens all at once in a very large development that may come in, or the type of vehicle that you may be driving. We want to make available other opportunities besides fossil fuel vehicles. Like, we want to increase that infrastructure. We want to promote that infrastructure. Of course, the city cannot do it on our own. We can just encourage our developers as they come in.
Yes. Okay, that's the last objective for conservation. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay, thank you, Seth. All right, so the next chapter is chapter 6. There are 3 or 4 elements in this chapter. I'm going to invite Brett to come up here. He's going to talk about the public schools element and the intergovernmental coordination element.
Good evening, everybody. I will try my best to keep this short and sweet. The first one, the public school facilities element, really has not seen significant changes. We're continuing to work with Orange County Public Schools to facilitate school concurrency, to make sure that we have the facilities to meet development as it comes in, and that's really what this element speaks to. The first objective, as I said, is working with ensuring that development is concurrent with the infrastructure specific to schools is concurrent with the facilities that we have. So it's continuing to work with Orange County, make sure we're meeting the level of service, or they're meeting the level of service standards as it pertains to schools. The second is looking at alternative mitigation strategies. So when an area is deficient or a development is causing deficiencies, how we can mitigate that through a variety of different mechanisms. That's looking like this as a payment of proportionate fair shares, potential contributions to the construction of new schools, donation of lands, looking at capacity, paying into a mitigation bank, things such as that. Or if there are no alternatives, looking at postponing development until there is capacity available to serve incoming development. The third is looking at school facilities planning. So the city wants to continue to work with Orange County Public Schools to ensure that facilities, that Orange County Public Schools are planning and looking at the growth that we're looking at and ensuring that capacity can meet demand. And the fourth is looking at continuing education facilities. An example of this could be Orange County Technical School, where it's that post-secondary, where we're looking at technical schools that don't just contribute to traditional after high school education, but looking at technical colleges, technical institutes, and opportunities for students to continue in non-traditional ways, not just college. That is the public school facilities element. I'll move on to the intergovernmental coordination element. And again, we haven't seen much change with this element from the current comp plan to what we're proposing in the new. We want to continue, as I think everybody has reiterated in the different elements, that we want to continue and we have to continue working with different agencies, whether that be federal, state, other local municipalities, or even franchise agreements with various utilities. So the different objectives really speak to that, making sure that we're coordinating our comprehensive plan with other municipalities, then looking at other potential development impacts and how our development in the city is impacting other municipalities and other areas. The third, and Jen spoke to this earlier in the utility sub-element, but looking at coordinating with other municipalities and other organizations as it pertains to utilities operations. And then the fourth would be looking at different interlocal agreements we may have with other municipalities. These can cover a variety of different things from, I believe in the past we've looked at code enforcement with other municipalities, as well as providing law enforcement backup or other things. But in looking at those interlocal agreements that we have and ensuring we continue to do that. And then finally, this kind of speaks to what we talked about in the school element, but continuing to coordinate with OCPS. So again, to kind of summarize, there's not too many notable changes with this element. We're really just seeing some cleanup. There was some administrative codes referenced in our current comprehensive plan that aren't applicable, that were done away with per Florida statute. So removing those references, but keeping a lot of the same element and discussion. And that's the gist of that.
He's much taller than I am. Okay, so this is the last element in this chapter that we're going to present on. There is another element that's called the private property rights, but we're not going to be discussing that one since there are no changes proposed for that one. In the capital improvements element, it's pretty lengthy now because it has, at the time that the current comp plan was adopted, there was public schools legislation, so that capital improvement element had all the different tables of the revenue sources and all of the school boards' 10-year capital outlay plan with all their multitude of tables and things like that. So we've pretty much gotten rid of that, and we can move that to an appendix since it's not our budget, it's the school board's budget. So this CIE update is reorganizing the capital improvements element to make sure that we're managing and providing municipal services in as efficient a way as possible and making mindful decisions when we look to spending the city's resources. So the first objective is programming of capital improvements. By law, we are still required to have a 5-year scheduled capital improvements. We're not required to transmit it to the state, but we are required to have one. And we pull the capacity projects from the city's budget into the 5-year CIP, which we transmit to the state. One cleanup that we did in this objective is to clearly establish the protocols for identifying, prioritizing, and ranking funding for projects. Statute says that we have to list all the projects that are needed to provide and maintain adopted levels of service standards. It also says that each project has to have a funding source. It could be project not funded. or it could be project funded through private. But whatever those projects are, we need to list them. And then updating the facilities, the list of facilities in the CIE, which, I brought those CIE updates to this body on a number of occasions. So it's basically saying that we're going to do that. Objective 2 deals with having development pay for its proportionate share of the cost of maintaining the level of service. So continuing to implement the impact fee ordinance, negotiating with developers for the provision of capital facilities, developing and implementing a proportionate fair share program, having a clear methodology. The methodology will probably live in the code. And then, like Brett mentioned, continuing to work with Orange County Public Schools for school concurrency. 3 deals with our responsibility to be fiscally sound in our decision making. So making sure that we coordinate our land uses with the ability to meet level of service. Brett is our commitments and concurrency coordinator. So this objective basically is saying that we're going to continue to implement our concurrency management system, which specifically deals with transportation systems. There's a CMS spreadsheet that's just for transportation, but we're also looking at it in the utilities as far as the capacity of potable water, the capacity of wastewater, reclaimed solid waste, and recreational facilities in the Parks and Rec element. This objective also requires us, or the city, to continue to program and fund improvements that are needed to make repairs for deficiencies. Sometimes it's replacements, sometimes it's brand new facilities, but that's the charge that the city has when we do our annual update, is to identify where those deficiencies are and then program in those improvements. We're keeping the debt service ratio. There's no change to that, still keeping it at 1.10, so that's not going to change. That's the last one. Any questions? The whole team is here. We are all ears.
Comment more than a question, probably. One of the problems that we've had in the past with Orange County Public Schools has been charter schools. More than once, I have heard from the school district that, well, you're putting in a charter school, so we're moving you further down the line because you don't need a public school put there now. We have to work on that somehow. I look at the one charter school that we had that was right there on Silver Star. All the money spent on that, you put it in, county moves, the public schools move us further down the line because now we've got a charter school. The charter school fails, we need the public school. So I think when we start looking at the schools in the future and when other people come in looking at charter schools and adding another one into the city, we need to make sure of what we're really doing and is that going to be in our best effort. So we might want to really determine how, and I don't know how, to be honest with you, so why more of a comment than a question, but we need to somehow be able to determine whether it's worth it for a city point of view to let the charter school in, if that makes sense.
So there's a couple of things there. There's a loaded comment because public school districts have to report to the Department of Education. And I believe, and Mr. Geller can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe charter schools have to essentially meet the same curriculum and rigors of a public school, so they kind of count towards capacity. But we also have the interlocal agreement with OCPS that a lot of the Orange County and other Orange County municipalities are party to. That might be a mechanism that we can look at. In terms of whether or not we have the ability to approve non-public schools, right now the land use table says that there's no zoning district except for, I think, Ag 1 and Ag 2 and RCE 1 and 2 that allow schools by right. We don't have much Ag 1, A1, A2, RC properties left. The other zoning districts that allow schools allow them through a special exception. So that may be a conversation that we could have at the LDC stage when we get to that point, or when it's the next time to negotiate or discuss the agreement with the school district.
I mean, for me, I think, I think I'm pretty close where Joel is there, but, there hasn't been any change to this, and I feel like we don't have a mechanism or teeth to try to take back some of our impact fees and things that we give to the school board for building new schools, and we don't have anything on their 10-year range. So we have to figure out a way to say, if you're not gonna build, we're not gonna pay you. Millions of dollars goes to the school board and we're not getting new schools.
Right, that, I don't know if that lives in the agreement. Unfortunately, Mike's not here. I am not as versed on the school interlocal, but that might be something we can look at through the interlocal agreement. And we all know the schools are going to, I'm not gonna say it, Horizon's worse, but, you're right, we only have, like when I was growing up in Monticello, Florida, in the North Florida area, that one giant county only had one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. And I remember, my ride on the bus home was a little over an hour. So it is a challenge. Unfortunately, it seems like with the growth that the Central Florida and Florida in general is experiencing, Florida has historically received 3 million residents per decade. Based on the public policy workshop that I attended a couple weeks back, they are not projecting that to really change or lessen much. So as population continues to increase, our school system, not just here in Ocoee, but the district-wide, as soon as a school is built as a relief school, within the second year is already
Capacity.
beyond capacity. So it's like relief school after relief school after relief school. And I believe, and I'm not 100% sure on this, they count capacity based on permanent seats. They're not counting capacities based on portables. So the way the policy reads now, and I'm not sure, maybe it's another conversation with Orange County Public Schools, is there's capacity if the CSA, the concurrency service area that your development is in, if that service area doesn't have capacity, if the next service area does, then it's deemed as having capacity. So it is something that we need to look at.
Anybody else? Great job.
Thanks to the team, everybody's here. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want to take another break before we dive into the LDC?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought we were done. Yeah, let's take another 5-minute break. Ready? Let's rock and roll.
All right, welcome to the portion of the evening that is about the new land development code. This will be a bit informal. We only have a few slides, and we can be as conversational as you want to be. So we're going to give you a brief overview of the land development code update. Schedule-wise, we're looking at...
Sorry.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Tori. We're going to... the mic's not on.
Start over. No.
We're going to start over. Okay, I really don't know how much Tori covered, but I'm just going to do a recap. Okay, so the LDC update, we kicked it off in 2024 in February, and the goal is to achieve consistency with the Envision 2045 plan. So between February and December, there's a lot of data collection. There's back and forth with the consultant team developing a regulatory outline, and we received their first draft in December, the end of December. It wasn't the best draft, so we rejected it, and now we're working on a revision to that first draft, and we got that revision back February, so we haven't really had a whole lot of time to look at it, but we meet with them and talk with them regularly. The next steps for the LDC update is we're hoping to bring it back to you at a hearing in July, it's July 8th, trying to make sure that we schedule another workshop like this to dive into the weeds of the land development code. then hoping to get it to City Commission for a first reading in July and second reading adoption hearing in August. So the bulk of it, well, not the bulk of it, a lot of it is reorganization, so putting things in a better format. But for the LDC update itself, the contract that we have with the consultant team is to really focus on the zoning districts and use regulations, supplemental use regulations. The big one that we are, one of the big ones that we're putting in is architectural requirements. And then we're having a whole article on downtown and the mixed-use zoning districts. And then looking at the site design and landscaping and open space requirements from an urban form perspective, looking at our parking ratios to see if those need to be updated, and then looking at streets, sidewalks, and signage, because we do want to make sure our sign regulations comply with state law and case law.
If I may, Anoj and I have spent a lot of time thinking about the order and how a user would use this document to make it as user-friendly as a code can be. So that's, a lot of that is put into the order and thought behind the way it's laid out.
Yes. So some notable changes in zoning districts. You just heard that we are creating a new future land use category called mixed use. We're creating a complementary new zoning district called mixed use. I didn't mention this in the comp plan presentation, but there are, and by policy, a list of locational criteria. So someone can't just come to the city and ask for the mixed-use land use designation, someplace where there's no municipal services, surrounded by low-density residential, things like that. So they have to meet the location criteria, and therefore, I believe, in the comp plan policy. So should a site meet those locational criteria, then we can look at changing the future land use to mixed use, and then the corresponding zoning district to mixed use. In addition to that, we're moving away from PUDs. We're going to keep our existing PUDs because as those PUDs were adopted, they have their own standards. So not moving away from it isn't going to subtract the regulations that would still remain in force on those specifically approved and adopted PUDs. The second bullet I skipped on purpose because I wanted to bring up this map. You just saw it in the comp plan presentation. We're doing that city-initiated comp plan amendment to apply the mixed-use future land use category to the downtown as this map geographically shows. But we're also doing a corresponding rezoning of that downtown area to a mixed-use designation. So again, that's bullet 2. So we're going to do a city-initiated downtown rezoning. And you can see here that the mixed-use zoning district is added to the zoning map, and we're going to apply it to this location. Again, it's because this geographic area already contains everything from single-family detached to industrial and civic uses. So by operation, it already is operating as a mixed-use environment. Other notable changes, the permissible uses table, you all are probably familiar with table 5.1. It's very short. Sorry. It's very short. It's either just generally commercial or industrial or residential. There's not much, there's not much diversity in the list of uses. So with this update, we're expanding the use of the categories, the list of categories. We're including personal services, for example. Right now, if someone wanted to, if someone called and asked, can I put a barbershop here? It falls under commercial retail because we don't have something for personal services, estheticians and those industries would fall under personal services. So we're expanding or creating new categories and then expanding the lists within those categories. Lot dimensional standards, right now it's called the minimum lot regulations standard. We're looking at those to see if they need to be changed. For example, we're looking at removing minimum living area because we want to make different housing typologies possible. You can't really do that if all the lots in the city have to have a minimum living area. Also looking at adjustments to setbacks because, again, in order for development to in order to consider those changes in the minimum rights of way that we would ask developers, property owners to dedicate to the city for right of way, there's got to be a little bit of offset. So, maybe the front yard setback may not necessarily be for a single family home 25 feet or 30 feet, especially since our regulation says they're not allowed to do anything really in their front yard. It's got to be in the side or the rear. Well, if the code says you got to set your house 35 feet back and you're only in a 100-foot lot, you don't have a lot of space left in your backyard to do anything. So we're looking at all those different aspects. We are also looking at tightening the code relative to non-conforming uses, specifically in the downtown district. So there are quite a few properties in the city that have historically been operating in an illegal non-conforming status, and there are some that are legally conforming, or legally non-conforming. So just really quickly, the difference between, and I'm going to look to Mr. Geller to correct me if I'm wrong, the difference between an illegal non-conformity is that someone had expanded their use and they've been doing it for years and they've just continued operating, never been code enforced or code enforced to the point where they stop operation. A legal non-conforming situation is where that site and that structure met the codes of that at that time that they were constructed. But then when code changed, that site or that structure is no longer meeting their current code, so then it becomes a legal non-conforming situation. So what we're trying to do is correct non-conformings, both legal and illegal. It's my understanding that if something is an illegal non-conformity, they really have no protections. The city has the ability to tell them to tear it down, go do something else. But what we're looking at doing is, in order to help to improve the economic vitality of the city, especially in the downtown, if someone were to change occupancy and it's not really the use that we want, that site is not making the best use of the property, we're looking at the ability to, with that change in ownership or that change in use, require the site to become conforming to the new code. And then lastly, we are, of course, adding new definitions. For example, multiplex. We want to encourage multiplex. There are different kinds of plexes. There's duplex, triplex, quadplex. Unless it's defined, anybody can interpret them different ways. So we want to make sure that those definitions are clearly in there. The LDC, we're, like I mentioned, architectural design standards by product type, and I'm just going to click through all these to list what we're doing, and then Tori's going to, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and hand the mic over to Tori right now.
All right, so again, thinking about user friendliness of the code and how best to get the information that the user needs. One of the ways we're going to have our standards set up is by product type. So massing, height, facade, transparent. It's going to go like your 7th grade mass media class. Important, big stuff down to the small stuff. So we can get down to sealant and dryer vents if we want to, but we're going to start out with massing and height. We've got urban site design standards for healthy, active communities. And then we really want to emphasize a mix of uses in this code, both vertically integrated uses and horizontally integrated uses. One of the first things we comment on when any project comes in front of us is the connectivity, mostly for pedestrians, but safe and efficient connections from building entries to public right-of-ways and throughout sites. And that would be for all users, not just vehicle drivers. Again, multimodal accessibility. We're looking at updated parking ratios. Some of ours are slightly outdated, especially in a setting where we're talking about multimodal opportunities, so we'd like to balance that out. And then I'm going to start off with building orientation and frontage occupation. It's so extremely important because the way people interact with buildings is hugely important. So some of the ways that we're thinking about building orientation are placing buildings up to the public realm. When Anach was talking earlier about bicycle connections and pedestrian connections. The safest way for a pedestrian to get into a building is when the building is pulled up to the sidewalk in the public realm. So we have the benefit of putting buildings in such a way that they can be reached by the public realm and by users who are on bikes and using their feet. And then by using that type of orientation, we also screen parking from the public view. So we have nice spaces created by buildings that wrap around public right-of-ways, and we can hide the less pretty stuff.
Tori, I'm sorry, before
Yeah.
you go to the next slide, if you can go back to the
Yeah.
previous slide. I don't know if this mic's on. But looking at the image, the picture on the right of the screen, you can't tell where the right-of-way line is.
Yeah.
And you can't tell where the property line ends, stops and starts, and where the right-of-way stops and starts. So it's creating that experience, that pedestrian experience, so we can play with the numbers as far as minimum right-of-way shall be blah, 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 but it's really what we put in the right-of-ways where it connects to the buildings, and what we are able to design the building to look like, so that if someone were walking in the wide walks, the architecture's there so that they're being shaded from the elements, that, you know, that could be a quarter mile, but if you're walking along that versus the expanse of a Walmart, for example, you know, you walk from one end of the Walmart to the other end of the Walmart, it seems like a long ways. But if you were to make that Walmart facade look something like this, it may not seem like a long way. So that's what we're trying to get at.
Absolutely. All right, and then people often forget about the spaces between buildings, but those are just as important as the buildings. So using these spaces between buildings as amenity spaces, whether they be quiet, interactive, and reflective, or, you know, activated spaces, or whether they just be spaces for connectivity. Those are some of the things that we're looking at, because again, those spaces are just as important as the spaces that make up the buildings. Okay. Next, so the order of the code, again, big to small. So we are going to talk about massing and height. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, because this is a critical piece of getting a building to a scale that we can experience in a pleasant way, is height and mass. And our code sets up height by feet. So I'm thinking, and this is not something we've discussed, but I'm thinking about ways, you know, that we get variety in building height, because that's what makes a playful skyline. We need to be thinking about the future in that way. Building scale, that relates to how a human feels up against a building. Is it overwhelming? Does it feel right? You know, we went from building things with our hands 100 years ago to mass-produced big technology. So looking at scale and looking at the ways the buildings can be articulated to feel better. All right. Then we break down the code into architecture, and that would consist of, you know, the building design, the style, the articulation, transparency. So one of the things we want to emphasize is public realm again. Corners of buildings that are at public rights of way. What kinds of things can we do to give the side of a building frontage? This first image is a townhome building, but if you'll notice that this townhome building, they featured the end unit has a porch on the side. So we can do this kind of stuff in residential. We can also look at buildings that have important corners. What kind of corner treatments can we give them? Are they on a terminating vista? We're gonna look at corners a lot. And then again, horizontal and vertical integration of mixed uses. That first example is here in Central Florida. It's a very successful building in Celebration. We can have those things here too. Okay, before I get through that, again, back to the code, getting smaller. After we talk about high scale mass and then buildings, the building design, then we start talking about building elements. So things are gonna be written, I mean, well, I already have written, but like windows, roof components. And then we get into building materials and finishes. That's where we house any paint guidelines, guidelines about stucco, what are prohibited materials versus what are permitted materials. And then I also have written up some stuff about faux facade treatments. We don't want any stage set architecture. We want to have authenticity in our building design as well as our materials and how our materials are applied consistently to buildings. And then the code goes into specific standards related to building types. So I'm just going to run that list down real quick. Townhomes, duplex, two-family, multiplexes, multifamily, commercial office, parking garages, gas stations, ADUs, and then we will get into our downtown district where we have enhanced criteria. All of that language is to focus on emphasizing time-tested design principles of well-loved buildings, focusing on the public realm experience. We're gonna, getting to informing the height, scale, and mass of buildings. And then again, I've said it, but authenticity in architecture, building elements, and material usage, and consistency of how they are applied.
Okay, that was. So as mentioned before, we're looking at updating the parking regulations right now. For example, bicycle, if we're gonna promote bike safety, bike use, multimodal use, things like that, we need to set standards and expectations as new projects come in to provide those bike and pedestrian facilities. As an example, right now in the LDC, there is no requirement for bike parking. We ask developers to give us a few bike spaces, and we ask them to try to place it next to the main entrance of the building. I have had one like the 7-Eleven on Ocoee Papa Road. They placed the bike racks, the 4 that they were willing to give us, right next to the dumpster. I'm like, not a good place to put the bike rack. If you've bought a bike recently, they're quite expensive, especially for a quality road bike. You're talking 4-digit costs. You're not going to encourage someone to bike and safely know that they can park their bike somewhere if you don't provide those requirements in code. So what we're looking at is requiring minimum short-term bike parking as well as long-term bike parking, depending on the use type and the size. So an encouragement towards parking reduction is the development has to provide sheltered and protected bike spaces for long-term parking. Because it's not just for the people, like the argument I hear all the time, well, no one's going to bike to Home Depot. Well, the workers might. So their employees might. But it's just like the whole concept of sidewalks. Nobody's walking there. Well, that's because there's no sidewalk there. Developers build houses. Well, why do you need so many units? Well, because they're coming. Same thing with sidewalks. You put in the sidewalk, they'll start using it. So when we look at the other thing too is vehicle parking, we only have perpendicular parking requirements right now. The code doesn't speak to the compact parking spaces, angle parking spaces, backing in angle parking spaces, parallel spaces, like the Baldwin Park, their parallel parking spaces are 8 feet wide. But I was standing at the corner where the Publix is, and a fire truck came through, and it was fine, it fits. So those are the things that we are looking at in the LDC update, making sure that, as the image that Tori showed, the layout of the parking and circulation doesn't detract from the public realm. We haven't really delved into the streets and sidewalks provisions, but it is, again, we're looking at widening the right-of-way width so that we can put those public infrastructure pieces and components in there, but also bringing the buildings to the front. So when you think about it from that perspective, where the building line is to where the travel lane is really isn't going to change that much. It's just where are the lines drawn and where are the utility lines going. So we're also looking at code to identify what are primary elevations versus secondary elevations. And for us, we feel like if it's on a road, it should be treated as a primary elevation because we want our residents and our visitors to see nice quality architecture and design and interact. We don't want someone to just drive through the city of Ocoee. We want them to come, stop, shop, eat, recreate, tell their friends, and so forth and so on. Funny story, I was working on this PowerPoint last night, the comp plan, and my sister sent me a Zillow listing. I'm like, I think I know this road. I looked it up. It's in Laurel Blossom. I'm like, that's where I work. So she called to say, we decided we're going to move to Ocoee, and we want to make sure that there's access, there's circulation, there's shopping, because I love to shop. And she does. Friday every day, she goes and spends 5 hours at the mall. That's how she recreates. It's not at the park. But she is in her 50s. a medical professional looking for a place that has those short commutes to parks and recreation and shopping and entertainment. And, that's what we want to provide for our residents so that we can achieve that Live Here, Grow Here plan to make sure that they come, they have something to do. Again, sign code, we want to make sure that our sign code is not inconsistent with case law regarding messaging. And then the natural resource protection and supplementary use, we talked about, we spent a lot of time on codes regarding thrift stores, used goods, outdoor storage, things like that, because again, we need to set those parameters in place that aren't there now to protect the public realm again. So we're not going to say no to it, but if you come with it, then these are the requirements and design standards that we expect you to go by. And I think that was, yes. So next steps, like I mentioned, we're finalizing the first draft. We're hoping to bring that to this body in July. We have 2 months left to work with our consultant team on the code write-up. This was sort of delayed because we really wanted to get a handle on where we were going with the policies in the comp plan, which is why they're sort of like two logs on the same river going at the same speed, but in different locations. I always have a movie reference. And then a hearing in August. So because this is not a comp plan amendment, the first reading is just a reading of the title. Then the second reading is the adoption. Whereas in the comp plan, the first reading is also a public hearing where Mr. Geller reads the title, and we also have a public hearing. So with that, that's all we have for the LDC update.
Any questions? All right, great.
Can
We've
I
worn
just
you
make an offer? And we'd have to, if anyone's interested, either on staff or up here on the dais, and those on the dais, we'd have to do it separately because of the Sunshine Act. But I live in Baldwin Park, and where some of these ideas come from. If you want to see it in real life, I've given tours to planners from around the state of Florida, and I'd be happy to take any of you around, and you can see how this stuff, how it works in the real world. And it's some really cool things that, just compliments to all the staff here for really trying to increase the quality of the aesthetics here and the functionality and everything. It's really tremendous, and it's a real privilege to be able to be here tonight and hear all this.
I'll piggyback that a little bit. I would say in Central Florida, we have some of the best examples of new, buildings and new communities. I'm gonna go with that, new communities, new neighborhoods. And I had the benefit of working and studying every day the city of Charleston, South Carolina. So, it's easy to identify time-tested design principles that will last and that will stand the test of time. And so that's what we're looking at. We want to build buildings that people will love and that will benefit all of our residents for a long time.
Yeah, one of the main takeaways from the marriage of the comp plan and the LDC is that we can negotiate use, we can negotiate, those little things, what happens inside the building. But the main thing is, if you build the infrastructure wrong, it stays there. If you build the building wrong, it stays there. I process, my planning staff, we process change of tenants, change of occupant permits weekly, sometimes 2 a day, but the building's still there. So if you build an ugly building, it's going to stay there until somebody comes in and can afford to knock it down and build something better. So the purpose of this LDC update is to get that nice architecture, that interaction with the public realm, regardless of who changes on the inside. So that's it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Tori.
Are we now at project status report? Or is there more?
No, this isn't a public meeting like that, so no project status.
Cool. Anybody have any questions for staff? Great. It's been awesome. You guys did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John?